From the CISO Series, it's cybersecurity headlines.
LinkedIn harvested posts for AI training without consent. Ransomware groups make good on threats. And AT&T pays $13 million FCC settlement over vendors' data breach. These are some of the stories that my colleagues and I have selected from this past week's cybersecurity headlines. Much like a trip to the record store, where we're going through the CDs, we're looking through the stacks, we're finding the best selections for you. And now we have some insight, opinion, and expertise from our guest, Mike Rosen, the CISO over at ZwillGen, advisor to Night Dragon, and villager at Team 8. Mike, thanks so much for making the time to be here. You're a busy guy, and I appreciate your time.
Cool. Thank you for being here as well.
All right. Thanks also to our sponsor for today, Conveyor, complete customer security reviews in one click with AI. Join us on YouTube Live. To do so, you can go to CISOseries.com. You can also go to YouTube.com, but CISOseries.com is the easiest way to do it. Hit the events drop down, look for that old cybersecurity headlines week in review image. If you click on it, you are joining us, and you are going to be having a good time. Much like I'm already seeing in our chat, Michael Vinding, we got Kevin Farrell, we got a cat. Sure, why not? Everybody's wanting to click links in there. I'm not advocating that in any way in the chat, but we want to see you in the chat. If you have not joined us live, it is a good time. Lots of friends in there sharing their opinions on the news. Make sure you get in and do that. I'm looking forward to seeing all of the peer-reviewed clicks that are coming later in the show. Thanks so much for all of you for being here as well. Before we move on, just a quick disclaimer that Mike's opinions today are his own. They're not necessarily those of his employer or any affiliates. Sure, why not? So we're getting the straight dope from Mike, and I do appreciate that. We've got about 20 minutes, so let's jump right into it. The first one here, this was making quite a bit of news across social platforms, including LinkedIn, which harvested posts for AI training without consent. According to the Register, LinkedIn started harvesting user-generated content to train its AI without asking for permission. As you might expect, might not sit well with all of its many members. This was revealed in a trust and safety update published through Microsoft's Self-Help Network on Wednesday. I know you're all avid readers of that. Some people are not. In the update, Senior VP and General Counsel Blake Lawitt revealed LinkedIn's use of people's posts and other data for both training and using its generative AI features. He added that the site's privacy policy had been updated. Again, we've all read it front to back. No problem there. The Register notes that this policy links to an FAQ that was updated sometime last week, meaning it appears LinkedIn started gathering up content for its AI models and opting in users well before Lawitt's post. So, Mike, this story, a double issue here. The first being that, like so many other trusted online organizations that we use on a regular basis, it's apparently chosen to use our back and forth data as fodder for an LLM. It's the new oil, whatever metaphor you want to throw at it. It's not super surprising. There are opt-out options, and as mentioned, it's now part of the user agreement. Most people will still use the free version of LinkedIn. I guess my question is, where does the ownership here lie? Does the data being used to train LLMs belong to the people submitting it, or hey, we're putting on these social platforms, it's their business once we post it?
Sure. So I think this issue really is enabling an opt-in by default. I think the user should have the ability to decide whether or not their data, their communications is going to be used for business intelligence purposes. Who knows what's going on behind the scenes? But totally agree that the data in the end of the game, the data I feel belongs to the person. But using this data for training purposes, I don't think that's the greatest use of an organization and the way they handle their data. So they could do better.
Yeah, I mean, I could think of maybe one, like maybe Reddit is more of the place where people are going to be aware of these, but like LinkedIn is a very informed audience. Like this is going to come to light, and I feel like people will have very deep and considered opinions on that. Microsoft is not new to this, right? Like they know how to do opt-ins right, and they know how to not do it right. It just seems weird that they would go and do this, but I guess the value's there, and maybe they figure LinkedIn people aren't going to be changing anytime soon.
Yep, it's interesting that they also said it's included in the privacy policy, and maybe what 1%, 2% of the population will read a privacy policy from, unless you're an attorney. That's really not, people aren't taking a look at that.
Maxtronic points out that explains why there's so much engagement farming on LinkedIn over the past few years. Maxtronic, I invite you to come to Threads. You have not seen engagement farming until you have gone to Threads. Leave LinkedIn alone. Next up here, ransomware groups make good on threats. This is an update to two separate ransomware incidents where the organization involved said they were not going to pay the threat actors, and the ransomware actors did exactly what they said they would: release the data. Hey, they were threat actors of their word. On Monday, the cyber criminals responsible for the attempted extortion of the Port of Seattle posted a 100 Bitcoin ransom demand, along with images of allegedly stolen documents, things like U.S. passports and other personal information. The second incident involves Kawasaki Motors Europe, in which the Ransom Hub group released 487 gigabytes of data allegedly stolen from the motorcycle manufacturer. So, Mike, kind of certainly an ongoing battle. We've covered numerous ransomware stories over the years here. Agencies like CISA always come out and say, don't pay the ransom. And apart from the defiant nature of this statement, there's still the risk that the company won't get its data back. There's never any guarantee when operating with these kind of actors. In addition, other organizations see this as the cost of doing business. That's kind of been one of the narratives I've seen been playing out this year, especially, like people really beating that drum. People just realizing or making the calculation that the losses of holding out would be greater than just paying right up front. I'm curious, what's your take on this?
Yeah, the general consensus is not to pay these ransomware groups, these threat actors. There's a lot of discussion within CISA as well as U.S. Treasury as well, especially with restricted entities. But it really comes down to the organization has insurance, and whether or not what type of data or systems that have been ransomed, often in cases in healthcare or in life or death situations, operational security, ICS, like you're gonna have to put in a negotiator and work with these people to get your data back and get back on business online. Not everyone's going to be able to have downtime. There's a lot of discrete situations here.
Yeah, it's one of those things where the longer I look at the cybersecurity news, the more I have to have. I realize I need to have more empathy, I guess, for these situations. Like, these are not cut and dry decisions. You cannot necessarily be. It's easy for me to be dogmatic because I have no skin in the game. Like, the worst thing that's going to happen is someone's going to lock out my Drobo and okay, okay, I don't pay that ransom, but I'm not operating a Fortune 500, Fortune 100, Fortune 50. That's, there has to be some empathy for, like, there are a ton of concerns when you have a massive outage caused by ransomware and that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. And an interesting quote that came out of the Mandiant conference this week is an analyst from Recorded Future was discussing potentially hacking back, sending a drone potentially to this attacker's home or wherever they are, and kind of leveling the field a bit. That would send a shockwave through the organizations.
It is interesting. Yeah, I have heard more talks of, where these are increasingly all hybrid operations, right? Especially when we're talking about advanced actors and stuff like that. That traditional deterrence turns out can potentially work on cyber. And Michael Vinding making the very valid point. I'm not arguing with this. That if you pay, he says, when you pay, you fuel the machine for future victims. It's tough, but as long as payments are made, it will continue. Yeah, Michael, I'm not arguing with that as a principle, like, and as an objective fact, I can 1,000% agree with that. But I also realize that businesses aren't always making something for future principles. They're doing it to, I guess, keep the wheels of business moving for another day. So I believe me, Michael, I'm not advocating for it. I'm just saying I have more empathy for people that do the longer I do this. Next up here, AT&T pays $13 million FCC settlement over vendor's data breach. The settlement is in regard to a breach that occurred in January 2023 when threat actors accessed customer data of roughly 9 million AT&T wireless accounts stored by a vendor contracted to generate personalized video content, including billing and marketing videos. The vendor was required to destroy or return the data after the contract ended, which was years before the breach, but, and here's the key, failed to do so. AT&T was found to have inadequately monitored the vendor's compliance with their contractual obligations. So while AT&T fished between its couch cushions to pay the fine, $13 million, not breaking the bank for them, certainly it leaves us with the thorny issue of, not just third-party vendors, as we hear about all the time, but perhaps a deeper level of culpability from a group that did not fulfill its obligations. I mean, the reason it's in that contract is because they realize something like this could happen. AT&T could sue the vendor, of course, but could this case set maybe a precedent, demanding a greater duty of care on the part of larger businesses to oversee actions that vendors are already contractually obligated to perform?
Absolutely, and I think AT&T is kind of getting off the hook here. That fine is very light for an organization of that size. I also believe this is multiple times that they've suffered these types of data breaches where CPNI data that includes your number, your telephone number, name, email address has been breached by a vendor. So they need to implement a better vendor management program. Make sure that vendor is actually living up to what they state in that program, and thoroughly test that out. But yeah, AT&T can do better.
Definitely. And I think we're starting to see like a greater realization industry wide. I was just looking over the new CMMC 2.0 framework that's was sped through DoD rulemaking. And that's one of the big changes in it is holding subcontractors or holding contractors directly responsible for their subcontractors. A little bit similar to this, in a similar situation, and kind of realizing like, hey, there's a much wider chain here, making sure, hey, did you send the email saying, did you delete the stuff, AT&T? I don't think is too much of an ask for a company of that scale, for sure. Before I move on for our next story, I want to spend a few moments and thank our sponsor for today, Conveyor. Why do teams choose Conveyor over the competition for customer security reviews? A few reasons. One, market-leading AI accuracy for any format of security questionnaire with limited knowledge-based maintenance. 2, enterprise-grade trust center that automates every customer security request. 3, Conveyor's sales team is actually fun to work with. Learn why Conveyor is the security review platform your InfoSec friends love at conveyor.com. That's CONVEYOR.com. Our next story here, Credential Flusher steals login credentials directly from browser. Researchers at OA Labs describe this new technique as using an auto IT script to force users to enter their credentials in a browser operating in kiosk mode. Of course, Windows kiosk mode is admin mode, where it restricts users from running anything other than a specific application on a device. So your self-help computer at the store or anything like that, where you just want a single app being used. It also limits a user's ability to close the browser or access other applications, making it easier for attackers to obtain the desired information. The auto IT script does not steal credentials, but works with other stealer malware to do so. So, Mike, this issue focuses on undermining public trust in legitimate safety tools, things like password managers built into browsers. Many people are already skeptical of them to begin with. This certainly doesn't help. I guess, what advice would you give people who are unsure of using browser-based services like password managers, especially when stories like this come out and, maybe give them a little black eye?
Yeah, this issue presents itself often. I've seen in the past, specifically with info stealers. People are entering their credentials for corporate systems that they might be accessing. Maybe they're accessing their Office 365 environment, and then maybe they're also letting their family members or kids log into Minecraft or games or something else. And then you download an executable, malicious code on the system. Next thing you know, you've got an info stealer grabbing all your creds and sending that back to threat actors. I'm a big fan of using the keychain. I'm a big fan of password managers. I'm hesitant on the browser, on the security of browsers using caching your passwords.
Yeah, it's one of those situations where it's degrees, right? It's like, that's better than reusing passwords, but then using discrete stuff. I mean, heck, a written ledger sometimes I feel like is it gets the bad name a lot of times, but I'm like, as long as you're keeping that secure, and I don't know. Sometimes I feel like the old techniques can still have value, but yeah, it's graduated degrees of, this is better than nothing, and then there is something better than that. And I think it's important, especially when we're talking about like more mainstream adoption of this. It's like, as long as people are going in the right direction, like let's give credit where credit is due, right?
Right. Back to the days of the Post-it notes and maybe some disappearing ink.
Yes, yeah, we can with little lemon juice. You can light it up, and you get a little thrill when you look at your password every single time. It's not that bad, I promise. Also, don't look at my monitor, please. Anyone, no photos of my monitor ever. I'm just kidding. All right. Next up here, one of my favorite stories of this week: Newmark creates volunteer network for civil cyber defense. At the Aspen Cyber Summit, Craig Newmark, the Craig in Craigslist, announced his philanthropic organization has worked with CISA, the University of California, Berkeley, and the Cyber Peace Institute to create the new volunteer network for civil cyber defense. Newmark described the initiative as a way to bring critical resources into communities that need a hand with cyber protection and resilience. Craig Newmark Philanthropies will provide $1.2 million in funding, initially aiming to coordinate existing resources to high-risk communities. The volunteer network will operate as part of the programs under the Newmark Foundation's Cyber Civil Defense Coalition. Obviously, this is a ongoing concern for Newmark and a current evolution of this. It's interesting tying to our earlier story on ransomware groups and the cost of doing business. In the words of Ann Cleveland, a partner in the project, the Cyber Civil Defense Coalition is focused on an attack on a local dentist's office or a middle school that can be devastating in communities. I don't know about you, Mike. That sounds pretty good. I'm curious, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I'm all for it. Let's do it. Let's bring the militia back and have a volunteer cyber army that's responding to these incidents. I think especially small businesses, they don't have the funding or the technological know-how. So if you're willing to invest your time and volunteer, let's do this. I know we have organizations like ISSA and InfraGard and ECTF as well that have volunteers that are there to help and share knowledge. So totally for this. It's almost like the SETI program, but now we're doing it for responding to incidents.
I do wonder how much of this just needs to be communication, like this exists. I feel like that is some of the biggest barrier. I mean, when you're talking about like when you're going to like that local dentist office, like I'm sure their cybersecurity is. I asked my dentist is I asked my kid to look at it and change our passwords. I don't know, once a quarter or something like that. So I feel like a lot of it is just awareness that these resources are out there. And I think that's what's interesting about this this coalition is a lot of it is just coordination, right? There are all these resources out there, but you might have no idea how to find them, especially when you're locked out of your systems or you're dealing with a breach or something like that. You're at the lowest point in the attack cycle. And so I think that in itself, just by itself, could be extraordinarily valuable to a lot of organizations, when we're talking about municipalities or small businesses, that kind of stuff.
Agreed.
All right. And finally here, knowledge base is at risk due to ServiceNow misconfigurations. According to researchers Aaron Costello and of AppOmni and Dan Maged of Adaptive Shield, thousands of companies are potentially leaking secrets from their internal knowledge base or KB articles through ServiceNow misconfigurations. The researchers, working separately and publishing separate reports, suggest that pages set to private could still be read by tinkering with ServiceNow customers' KB widgets. This applies to cases where an organization's KB is set to public, but the pages inside of it are set to private. Megid estimates 30% of ServiceNow customers have this faulty configuration and could be unwittingly exposing secrets held in their knowledge bases, such as first-time access passwords for new starters, connecting to a company VPN. It's kind of a not exactly an ideal scenario there. So, Mike, this is one of those cybersecurity stories about an overlooked feature, like forgetting to set the brakes on a park train, something so innocuous as to become invisible over time. These are the things that cybercrime organizations actively look for and thrive on. I guess, how can we make it easier for organizations to spot these types of hidden weaknesses?
Yeah, this is a great article, especially due to the implementation of ServiceNow within the Fortune 500. It's massive. It's used for everything from operations to help desk ticketing. There's has to be a configuration audit. You have to look into, see what's globally available, read, write. It has to be ongoing, part of the security program, vulnerability assessments, pen testing regularly. So yeah, this definitely opens a door for the reconnaissance phase within the MITRE ATT&CK framework as well. Once you're gathering data on where certain systems or certain data, specifically sensitive data, and where that resides on the network, and just any sort of incidents that are ticketed and that are accessible by those in the organization and then outside the organization, that they need to take a closer look. This is important.
Yeah, letting an attacker kind of basically get your entire internal topography like that, we know is incredibly dangerous. it does remind me a little bit of the classic, unencrypted S3 bucket that's sitting on the internet for forever, something that, I set something to private, ergo this must be private. Obviously, there's a little bit of chicanery that you need to do, through customer widgets and that kind of stuff to actually get access to this type of data. I'm not saying it's completely just out in the open, but I feel like this might have one of those long tails where we're seeing the impacts of this for a long time. And those are as we've seen, there is damage in dwell time and kind of getting that organizational map, of any level for a variety of malicious means. So yeah, definitely glad this came to light so people can get to work on it right away. All right, before we get out of here, just want to give a quick thank you to everybody in our chat today. Michael Vinding, Max Trana, keeping it fun, keeping it a little snarky, and a cat sent a smiley face, which made me feel very happy, and I deeply appreciated that, a cat. So thank you for that, and for all of our commenters in there. Good stuff as always. Before we get out of here, Mike, was there any story that was a thumbs up or an eye roller for you today, just in the rundown or just kind of out there in the news ether, as it were?
I would say an eye opener even is the revelation that recently came out with Starlink being used for nefarious purposes, potentially even identifying stealth aircraft. This has unintended consequences for Starlink. So definitely something to keep your eye on.
Yeah, and we'll have a link to that in our show notes by the good folks over at Futurism. We're reporting that they're always having some good stuff there. They've had some good stuff with like AI writing stuff. They always find some very interesting angles on stuff. So that is always good. And Kat, I'm glad you're enjoying the stream. That is awesome. Thanks for coming. We appreciate everybody in our chat. Mike Rosen, CISO at ZwillGen, advisor to Night Dragon, and villager at Team 8. Thank you so much for crushing it today, for being amazing, for helping make the show fantastic. Where can people find you on the cyberspace if they're so inclined?
Pretty active on LinkedIn, but I will say I'm not opted into the AI option there. So if you want to reach out, go ahead.
But in a future Microsoft product may not be informed by your LinkedIn post. So that is a bummer. But thank you, Mike, so much for your time, for your expertise. This was an absolute pleasure. Thanks once again.
Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it.
Thanks also to our sponsor for today, Conveyor, complete customer security reviews in one click with AI. Thanks again to our audience. We can't always get everything up on the screen, but you help make the show what it is, and we deeply appreciate that. Make sure you join us next Friday for our 2 live stream extravaganza events. First up, we got Super Cyber Friday, where we'll be discussing hacking alerts, an hour of critical thinking about triaging the deluge hitting your SOC. That happens at 1 p.m. Eastern. And then you can join us here for another week in review at 3:30 Eastern. Get in here, spread the comment love. We want to see more people on the live show. That would be spectacular. And in the meantime, you can still get your daily news fix through cybersecurity headlines. Every single day, give us about 6 minutes. We'll get you all caught up. Until the next time we meet, I'm Rich Stroffolino, reminding you to have a super sparkly day.
Cybersecurity headlines are available every weekday. Head to CISOSeries.com for the full stories behind the headlines.